Hello and good afternoon, evening, good morning, whatever applies. We're back for another installment. Hey, Curious, how are you today? I like this little disco doggo DJ ghost date dance. Cute. So, we are back for another installment of my classical literature, specifically the Classical Masterpiece series. And we are going to be starting another book today. But before that happens, I figured I'd let a couple more people kind of pop in. And I put together this overlay to kind of match the rest of my pirate themed Stream Deck stuff. So attempting to reconnect, that's not good. Uh-oh. Wah wah. I don't know if it's working. Na. That's not good. Of all the times. Bitrate, it says offline. That's round 2. Domo arigato, Mr. Roboto. Poor network connection detected. Well, that's woo! We're gonna have a wild one today. That's fair. This one will have to just go up on YouTube when it's all done. Um, so for context, for any of my watchers that are here, I live in the frozen north that is Alaska. So occasionally, periodically, um, it shows that I have no one listening. Ah, fun times. Boop boo doo 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 woo hoo 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 hoo. Wow, it's making me do another ad. Fine. Fun times. Yep, really. It really is. Because I disconnected. So that means that it's thinking I'm starting a whole new stream. Hooray! Yeah. Good times. Oh, while that's going, I'll sit here and chat. But anyway, we have had a lot of people. There's a stream setting, interruption setting somewhere you can check. I'm not sure where. I think after the stream I'll have to look that up, or if you've got a minute to kind of look that up, you can track down that info and just send it to me. That would be really useful. Yay. Thanks. I appreciate it. Um gotta love it. Okay. We will wait until the ad is done. Boop boo doo 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 doo. Wah. Oh man. Feels good. Bum ba da 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 da. Maybe this time Discord will play. Oh, good. Good. It notified my server twice. That's God, so many testing. It's not ready to go live yet. Okay. Well, ad's still going. Might as well take a look at that now. Disconnection protection. Brought to you by Twitch.tv. This feature helps you keep your stream online and viewers engaged during network disconnects. Your viewers will see this message for up to 90 seconds while you troubleshoot and reconnect. Also, the recorded VOD will be continuous to ensure the best viewing experience. Wah, 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 wah. So, under stream settings, da da da, da da da. Okay, under stream settings. Do you poor bastards that are listening to me do this? Okay, settings, the gearbox, the clickety clickities, stream settings. Go to stream. Stream settings, disconnect protection. You can enable the disconnect protection from the stream settings page. Simply toggle on the disconnect protection preference. That has skipped a step. Hooray! Okay, ba-ba-da. Disconnect protection is now turned on. Hooray! This is how we'll talk now. We're so excited to be here. Oh, God. Fun times. Okay, I think we're good now. Mike, boop, boop. All right, bless all of your sweethearts for stopping by and listening to this shenanigans. I think we're cooking with gas now, though. Okay. I have turned on the disconnection protection. There are so many, like, you would think auto-enabled things that Twitch could enable. Nothing against Twitch, but they don't. And it just makes me wonder, like, if there's some magical, like, super guide somewhere. Oh, yeah, there is. I just haven't watched all the videos yet. I will eventually. I will. I've watched some of them. Regardless. Here we are, back again. Hopefully it stays this time. Huzzah! We are back again for another installment of my classical literature series. Specifically, this is my classic masterpiece series. I probably need to update the... whatever. Hi, Valen! But today, we are actually going to be taking a free ride on my Stream Deck and learning how to work that appropriately. So, pray, pray for me because it's going to be muster all of your enthusiasm. Da, 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 da. Yes. Woo, woo! Yeah. So we've got the soundboard, some fun stuff, and welcome back, Curious. And it's a little wild. I'm gonna get this thing dialed in, but I got the disconnect protect on. So anyway, let me go ahead and try out one of these fancy buttons that I've installed. Hopefully it works properly. Fingers? Yes, I know. Vexen Cat Librarian is live. Let's see, go over here to reading. Okay, so welcome back again. This is the library, and I kind of do things, if you haven't been here before, in kind of a specific format. Yes, we are covering Treasure Island and an assortment of his poetry at the beginning as well. I learned a lot in the process of researching him. He's a wild guy. So yes. I love classical literature, so it's been a wild ride. I covered a little bit of Edgar Allan Poe, Mary Shelley, Bram Stoker. I then, of course, we just did Peter Pan, and now we're on to Treasure Island, and as well as assortment of his poetry. So let me grab this over here. There we go. So we are gonna get started with a little blurb about Mr. Robert Louis Stevenson. By the way, he preferred to go by Louis by friends and family. And believe it or not, he actually changed his name when he reached his majority at 18 from Louis with an EW to Louis as an LOU, Louis. The more you know. Weird, obscure fact about this author. So let's see here. So couple of facts that are kind of interesting. He was born in 1850, so raised during a time that was a little bit rougher on history, and so some of the language that he uses in both his poems and his stories, because I actually did not realize that Lewis Stevenson was the same author of Treasure Island as is the Mr. Jekyll or Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. I did not realize that was the same author. So that's been kind of an interesting through line that I didn't recognize. So let's get over here, grab this. So he was actually born Robert Louis E.W. Stevenson in Edinburgh, Scotland in 1850. His father Thomas was a second generation civil engineer, and his mother, I believe her name was Margaret. Uh, grab that over here. Grab her information here. I thought I had this in the right order, but it's a little goofy since things got wild here. Okay, Margaret Isabella Balfour, his mother, christened him Robert Louis, and he dropped the Balfour. His full name was Robert Louis Balfour Stevenson, and at about 18 years of age, he changed his middle name Louis to Louis with a L-O. U, and then he dropped Balfour altogether, and that was about 1873. All through his childhood, he suffered from just kind of a weakness of constitution. He was very sickly. Later, he did, contract tuberculosis, which didn't help things. He himself just had a really hard time and a difficult time surviving his life. His dad did pretty well. They had plenty of income to take care of himself. He always had access to the family physician. And, he just got bronchitis at a young age, and it just sapped him of almost everything. From the beginning of his life to the end of his life, which was only 44 years of age, he did his best to live as his parents wished, including going to college and taking the bar exam to become a lawyer. Even though he didn't have the physical constitution to be a civil engineer, his father encouraged him, because of his intelligence, to become a lawyer, which he did. And in fact, in 1875, at 25 years of age, he took the bar, passed, and then proceeded to do absolutely nothing with that information. Like, he was a non-practicing lawyer. So once he kind of took his life into his own hands, he actually pursued writing. So in the latter half of his life, he pursued writing and was really a big fan of like fiction and novelty stories. And he actually did write for a couple of different publishing houses, specifically what's the one in Scotland called? So his first published work was The Pentland Rising, and that was posted in 1866, and that was in the Coventers. And then later, when he published a number of works through the University of Edinburgh, including The Velvet Jacket, some of his short stories, and let's see here. He wound up being criticized by other authors because they felt that his style of writing was too similar to other authors of his time, namely William Hazlitt and Daniel Defoe. After he received his law degree in 1875, a number of his essays were published. The Island Voyage in 1878, The Travels with a Donkey in the Cevennes in 1879. And then he actually made a trip over to America in 1879, where he he met and fell in love with Miss Fanny Van de Grift Osborne, a divorcee. And she was about 10, 11 years older than him, and she already had a son. And she was living with her son, and I don't know if her other child was a boy or a girl, but her two children. Um, he fell in love with her, and she was like, "Oh, that's nice, dear." And then she went back to California, and and she was actually there for another year, and then he actually received correspondence from her that caused him to leave Scotland for America later that year in August. And he pursued her, and he loved her um, to the moon and back, kind of like Edgar Allan Poe loved his wife to the ends of the earth. So they actually got married the following summer in May in 1880, and for their honeymoon, they actually went to Mount St. Helena and lived in Silverado in a tiny shack. And then a number of his adventures while living in Silverado led to the Silverado Squatters in 1883, Across the Plains and Other Memories and Essays in 1892, and then the amateur immigrant from the Clyde of Sandy Hook in 1895. All are related to his trip in California. So Fanny, and her son Lloyd eventually settled in Braemar Cottage in the summer of 1881, where he began writing Treasure Island. So his 12-year-old stepson was also confined to being indoors during the school holiday, so he amused himself drawing pictures. And Stevenson recalled in his essays in the art of writing that he would join the artist, so to speak, at his easel and pass the afternoon with generous emulation, like making colored drawings and sketches. And because of some of these drawings, he made a map of an island that was, he thought, beautiful. And then the shape of it took his fancy even beyond just the imagery and actually began the ticking of his mind to write Treasure Island. So he filled in the map with names like Spyglass Hill and other like hidden treasures and other special like significant markers on the map. I'll grab that here. Da, 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 da. We want this map. So it's kind of hard to see, but over on the left we see the Spyglass Hill, the Cape of Yes Woods. Um, I have no idea. This handwriting is atrocious. Wild Rock, Skeleton Island. I'm assuming Kill Ground, maybe? I don't know. Foremost Hill up in the top. North Inlet on the top. We have a cove, spring, open, and another number of things that are almost illegible with this particular handwriting. So this is the actual drawing by JL.
Oh yeah, it's time to plunder that booty.
Thanks. Yep, we're off to Pirate Neverland here. So he he drew this image. Yep, he drew this image, and this began the ticking of his brain and got him thinking about writing the story. Now, during these later years in the 1800s, 1880s, specifically, during that time, there were no recreational books for young boys. Like most of the literature of the time was books that were specifically like educational because they didn't want boys to have fanciful ideas. They wanted them to focus on their studies. So there was like mathematics, sciences, history. There wasn't whimsy. There wasn't fun, joy sorts of situations, right? So him writing this book, Treasure Island in particular, is an a way for children to find joy. Yes, yes. They were very focused on academic pursuits, only nothing for creativity or joy or the imagination. So He wrote the book. Here, let me grab this. Da, 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 and in just a very short amount of time, I believe in the short story, it was originally a short story, Treasure Island. Um, it was actually written and submitted under the name of the pseudonym of Captain George North. In this medium, Fanny confessed that she didn't like the book and was against it ever appearing in book form. Nevertheless, despite his wife's protest, it was published in 1883 and became a bestseller. Um, During the first year of its publishment, I think it sold 40,000 copies or something like that, some outrageous number, because this book has been sold and retold in other languages. I think it's the 70th um, bestseller in the course of classical history. It's really, really high up there. So he wrote and like I said, it was published in 1883, and then later he actually went on to write other works of fiction, including the A Child of Garden Verses in 1885, some of his poetry that kind of harkens back to his childhood when he was convalescing and sickly. And then also he wrote another book that was called Young Folks in 1883. Um, and then that was published serially in 1885. The Black Arrow was another um, popular book that didn't quite catch on as big of a classic as Treasure Island. Um, grab that. And then the story of Treasure Island, Jim Hawkins, Long John Silver are like two of he created stereotypes, these tropes of the young character looking up to the a little wild, a little dangerous, older archetype. It really kind of set a new style of writing. I felt that he did a really phenomenal job. And um, after he wrote the book in Kidnapped, he wrote another book called Catriona in 1893. And I think that is the second to last book that he ever wrote. Um, but during the later part of the 1800s, in 1886, he actually did write his first adult novel, and that was The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. And we all know how popular that one has been, and how many iterations, movies, plays, and other works that have been like jumped off of that idea in that visual novel. Let's see. And that one's kind of interesting. I'm just going to wax poetically briefly about that book. I know. I had no idea, Alice, honestly. Um, he he wrote that book, and it's really funny. It's a funny story because when he wrote that book, here, let me grab the quote from it. What happened was he had always been fascinated by the idea of split personalities, but he couldn't figure out a way to write about split personalities. And then one night, dead of night, he was dreaming about the concept, Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde. And then he was screaming in the middle of the night. His wife, Fanny, was like, I thought he was having a nightmare, so I woke him up and he was mad at me. He literally said, "Why did you wake me? I was dreaming a fine boogie tale." Unquote. And I just think he was so deep into the sauce in his dream that he thought fully like manifested this idea of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde into that 40 plus thousand page book. And he wrote that book from starting that morning after she woke him up. He spent like the next 3 days writing that book. And he just whipped it out so fast. Um, a lot of historians speculate that his duality between Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde may have been inspired by an Edinburgh cabinet maker named Deacon Brodie, who was a town councillor and very successful craftsman. But he had access to the rich and the famous by making them cabinetry, and he would make copies of those keys in order to go back into their homes to steal their things. So in the day, he's this very kind, talented craftsman, and at night he's going into your home and stealing your shit. So that story really fascinated people in Edinburgh, including Louis Stevenson. But it was that story and that history of that duality fascinated him, and it even though it happened 60 years prior to uh, Lewis's life. So it's that double life, Deacon Brodie, the double life, but the cabinet and the man who built it may have influenced it, and they believe that that may have contributed to some of the characteristics of like the day happy and stoic versus the nighttime evil. Let's grab this. So I think I kind of covered most of the big points that I wanted to hit here. So so despite him being a successful author, him and his father never really saw eye to eye, because his father was a civil engineer, and though he became a lawyer, he was a much more famous author. And despite his young years, at 44 years old in 1894, he had a stroke, and that put him in the ground. And he was so popular and so beloved, that like 60 Samoans carried him to his resting place in Mount Vaea. So I'm not entirely sure how they got to there, because can't really see it. Just like he wrote Catriona, he wrote Kidnapped. He was working literally up until the day he died, and then he had the stroke, and then the next thing you know, he's being carried off to his resting place. It's kind of a little bit weird. I guess there's not enough information. But what I am here for is I want to talk about his handsome face. Look at this dashing man. Kind of looks a little bit like Edgar Allan Poe. Little more normal shaped head than Edgar had, but kind of that same sort of dreamy, faraway, convalescing look. A little sickly. But I have a number of his poems that I would like to read, including this is the first one. This is At the Seaside. When I was down beside the sea, a wooden spade they gave to me. To dig the sandy shore, my holes were empty like a cup. In every hole the sea came up, till it could come no more. It's just whimsical, it's light, it's got a beautiful drawing here, and this is from his book that he wrote, the children's classics, called The Child's Garden of Verses, Underwood's Songs of Travel and Other Verses. And this was actually put together posthumously, so after his death, by Sidney Colvin. Here's another one. Grab that. Bed in Summer. I'd like to remind you that these are poems that he wrote in thinking of his own childhood while he was convalescing. Bed in Summer. In winter I get up at night and dress by yellow candlelight. In summer quite the other way, I have to go to bed by day. I have to go to bed and see the birds still hopping on the tree, or hear the grown-ups people's feet still going past me in the street. And does it not seem hard to you, when all the sky is clear and blue, and I should like so much to play, to have to go to bed by day? This poor boy looking out the window holding his little sailing boat. Looks like a tennis racket on the floor. Another one. A land of counterpane. When I was sick and lay abed, I had two pillows at my head. and all my toys beside me lay to keep me happy all the day. And sometimes for an hour or so I watched my leaden shoulders soldiers go, with different uniforms and drills, among the bedclothes through the hills. And sometimes sent my ships in fleets all up and down among the sheets, or brought my trees and houses out, and planted cities all about. I was the giant great and still, that sits upon the pillow hill, and sees before him dale and plain, the pleasant land of counterpane. Yeah. Hmm. Again, another image of a young boy staring out the window, titled The Lamplighter. My tea is nearly ready, and the sun has left the sky. It's time to take the window to see Leary going by. For every night at tea time, and before you take your seat, with lantern and with ladder he comes posting up the street. Now Tom would be a driver, and Maria go to sea, but my papa's a banker, and as rich as he can be. But I, when I am stronger, can choose what I'm to do. Oh, Leary, I'll go round at night and light the lamps with you. For we are lucky, with a lamp before the door, and Leary stops to light it as he lights so many more. And oh, before you hurry by with ladder and with light, oh, Leary, see a little child and nod to him tonight. Hmm. So much sadness, so much whimsy. Oh, man. Another beautiful image here. I'll zoom in on this one a little bit. The Land of Nod. From breakfast on through all the day, at home among my friends I stay. But every night I go abroad, afar into the land of Nod. All by myself I have to go, with none to tell me what to do. All alone beside the streams, and up the mountain sides of dreams. The strangest things are there for me, both things to eat and things to see, and many frightening sights abroad, till morning in the land of Nod. Try as I like to find the way, I never can get back by day, nor can remember plain and clear the curious music that I hear. I like the little child in the button-up onesie situation. Some little doll or creature next to them. It's cute. Another one here. This is Autumn Fires. In the other gardens, and all up the vale, from the autumn bonfires see the smoke trail. Pleasant summer over, and all the summer flowers. The red fire blazes, the gray smoke towers. Sing a song of seasons, something bright in all, flowers in the summer, fires in the fall. Spicy. We've had enough fires this year, I think. And I think this is my second to last poem here, or this might be my last one. My Shadow by Robert Louis Stevenson. I have a little shadow that goes in and out with me, and what can be the use of him is more than I can see. He is very, very like me from the heels up to the head, and I see him jump before me when I jump into my bed. The funniest thing about him is the way he likes to grow, not at all like proper children, which is always very slow. For he sometimes shoots up taller like an India rubber ball, and he sometimes gets so little that there's none of him at all. He hasn't got a notion of how children ought to play, and can only make a fool of me in every sort of way. He stays so close beside me, he's a coward you can see. I'd think shame to stick to Nursey as the shadow sticks to me. One morning, very early before the sun was up, I rose and found the shining dew on every buttercup. But my lazy little shadow, like an errant sleepy head, had stayed at home behind me and was fast asleep in bed. Yeah, I'd say Lewis is pretty whimsical and just in some ways, I think it's hard being a child that can't go outside to play. Like that's difficult for any child. Yeah, I agree. Proper wordsmith. Good call there. Okay. This is one of the covers I really liked. Yeah, he did know the melancholy of life. I've noticed there is a through line between a certain level of misery and all of these classical authors. I feel like these tragedies create circumstances that want someone to imagine a better life and imagine something outside of themselves that they can escape from into. You know, escapism at its finest. But here is the cover for Treasure Island. Let me close that. Mm-hmm. Okay. And the really cool map. Da, da, da. So I have this is going to be a little dumb and a little unusual. I actually have three copies of Treasure Island open. I had originally found one from the Library of Congress, and bless them, they did their best, but the copy of their Treasure Island that they received is kind of in poor shape, to be honest. So, yeah, there's like cuts and stuff, but there is an introduction in the beginning I would like to read in this classic version that isn't in the other books. So, one second. Make sure we are. Mm-hmm. Oop, there we go. So, this version was actually printed. So, this one was first published in 1883. And this particular version, I think, was released in either 1941 or a little bit later. But here's a painting of the front piece. Boy, take his right hand by the wrist. So this is from a scene in the book. So this is the forward. And let me preface by saying I would like to let it be known that this book includes a number of antiquated terms and turns of phrases that I would find quite racist, but it was the 1850s. So I do not use nor condone the use of any of this language in modern day context or modern day language. So just forewarn. To the hesitating purchaser. If sailor tales to sailor tunes, storm and adventure, heat and cold, if schooners, islands, and maroons, and buccaneers and buried gold, and all the old romance retold exactly in the ancient way, can please as me they pleased of old, the wiser youngsters of today. So be it, and fall on. If not, if studious youth no longer crave, his ancient appetites forgot, Kingston or Ballantyne the brave, or Cooper of the wood and wave, so be it also. And may I and all my pirates share the grave where these and their creatures lie. Of all Robert Louis Stevenson's books, Treasure Island has been the most popular for reasons which should be fairly obvious. Excuse me. It was conceived in a playful mood and deliberately written for the entire entertainment of the human boy, of whom any display of verbal ornamentation or philosophical profundity would be thrown away. The story, like the old folk tales from which written romances have their origin, has for its single aim the evocation of emotions that are universal in youth and capable in maturity of recall by every one in whom disillusion, the chit chat of modern life, and excessive reverence for common sense have not atrophied the nerves that thrill to fine fabling. It was Stevenson's first attempt to reach many readers instead of a few intellectual aristocrats, and attained that end to a degree which influenced the author's subsequent career. That for 40 years, edition after edition after edition after edition of Treasure Island should come out, that it should be one of the most popular books of its time, its very title having a definite meaning for thousands who have never read it, may have seen a book or seen a movie like the live action Treasure Island, Muppet, Treasure Island, etc., um, would seem to indicate that romance is in eclipse only in the absence of a really good romancer. The tale was written for boys, but usually their fathers have had the first reading of it. Indeed, had its discovery as an adventure story of classic merit depended on the youths for whom it was primarily intended, Stevenson's first attempt to gratify more than a coterie might have been his last. Its first appearance as a serial in Young Folks sadly failed to interest the journal's readers. It was the wrong demographic. Only when it emerged in book form were its exceptional qualities discerned by the older generation. Its vogue began with the enthusiastic praise of sober, experienced men of the world. Gladstone sat up till 2 in the morning to finish it. Andrew Lang found it as good as Tom Sawyer, if not the Odyssey. A host of the most extingent critics in the loftiest kinds of papers, turning aside for the moment from the scarifying of pretentious adult works, gave expression to their delight in the boys' book, which was jolly for grown-ups to read. This discovery that imaginative art may use the simplest mediums, the oldest conventions, make no parade of any higher aim than to amuse, and find acceptance from the knowing ones as well as from the naive, has to be made periodically to keep the world old art of storytelling from passing entirely into the hands of the propagandist and the sociologist or the schoolmaster, those gentlemen whose work is apt to be dated and forgotten in a generation. But the case of Treasure Island is an example of another discovery, long since made in other fields by athletes, artists, and psychologists, that literary triumphs have not unfrequently been attained by taking it easy, by putting aside for the moment great tasks involving sweat and blood and turning to something trivial by comparison, in a spirit of recreation. After a week of the salmon rod, the trout wand feels to the hand like a feather to be used gaily used, and may even land a 20-pounder. I'm not sure where this like fishing detail came in, but it is an intro. It was in such an intermission in his quest for the big fish that goes, alas, to so few tables that Stevenson wrote Treasure Island. He had for 10 years been writing essays, travel sketches, critical reviews, short fantastic stories, and taking the most difficult route to his objective, like a conscientious alpine climber, not at all concerned to attract the notice of the multitude, but with a keen desire to express himself with a temperamental charm and originality that should commend his work to certain fastidious friends. Always his first inspirations a little bit, yeah, he was. Always his first inspirations in travel sketch or story had been romantic or dramatic. They came to him, as to so many young men, as delightful opportunities for masquerading in something quaint and picturesque in apparel and whimsical mental poses, which are a kind of velvet jacket, so good to the senses. They just feel good to write about. The chance to ramble through adventures of the mind in a mask and with a dark lantern under the coat was more than half the fun of writing for Stevenson all his life. It allowed him to imagine himself outside of his physical body and his physical limitations. Let's see. And even to that end, that fragile creature loved to don the habiliments of Bohemia and from what the Americans now call red blood men. Oh dear. This innocent theatricalism, which has in all ages, in more or less degree, been the genesis of more work renowned in poem and narrative, dictated from the first Stevenson's choice of themes for stories. Incidents must be out of the range of everyday experience. Characters must not be such as go to Savile Row for their clothing. This inverted kind of dandyism had extended to his writing. The current speech gave him no pleasure to cut and trim, and just as he preferred more antique fabrics, velvets and brocades, 18th century wrap rascals, and boat coats to a mackintosh or ulster, so for his patterns of style, rhythm, cadence, the kink in phrase, the old untarnished word with the lyric call in it, he took hints from the best writers of an earlier age. A delightful game, even if it involved much more strenuous application than tailoring for the mob, but new Arabian Nights, though it might please a coterie, cut no ice on the bookstall. Not thus, apparently, was living to be made. Indeed, in 1881, Stevenson had no idea how a living was to be made by his pen. Like, he had no success in 1881 before this was published in 1883. And he had tried most departments of letters save poetry and history. History, he was contemplating writing history, a kind of history dictated again by sheer romantics, a history of the Highlands with Rob Roy and Prince Charlie, elements salient in it, being from Scotland. This tracks. Fortunately, his marriage brought to his household a young boy, his stepson Lloyd Osborne from Franny, who had unconsciously on the part of both of them a beneficent influence on one who, though an eternal boy himself, had never had a boy to play with. Him, as an adult, being the stepfather, allowed him to play in a way that he never had as his own childhood. A boy will enter gleefully into any make-believe, and all the more heartily as if it implies unconventional garments, or none at all, but his acceptance of the unusual does not extend to speech and writing when it comes to stories. The thrill for him is everything, and Stevenson, for the boy Osborne in their games, had to shed the exquisite, the precious in speech, and come down, as the vulgar say, to brass tacks. The author and his wife and stepson were, in 1881, living in a cottage at Castleton, Braemar, hired for them for the summer by Stevenson's father, Robert. When not brooding on the projected history of the Highlands, Stevenson found the boyish company of Lloyd a relaxation. There were doubtless hours of playful occupation with literature for boys as found in the serial stories in Lloyd's weekly papers. The suggestion has indeed been made that Treasure Island came into existence with its author's eye on young folks, in which a favorite serialist for youth, Charles G. Pierce, had recently finished a story called Billy Bosun, with treasure, a chart, a cipher, and an island in it. In any case, Stevenson for Lloyd Osborne, and also, we may be sure, for that other boy who sailed over the sea to Skye, fashioned an alluring chart of an island of his own, furnished with sheltered coves, swamps, woods, and hills. a treasure cache, a stockade, and a skeleton. Everything, in fact, a boy wants in an island. That tracks. After having read Peter Pan, the boys imagine pirates and fighting and skeletons. That makes sense. It is impossible to make a map of this kind without the fancy playing round fictive incidents that jump to the imagination from coves, swamps, and forests. Indeed, if indeed the incidents do not themselves suggest the character of the map, and pirates, a cache, and a daring youth would have been inevitable components in such a scene if Charles G. Pierce had never written a line. Long ages of traveled men and gifted liars have stereotyped the inventory for islands. The scene visualized, Stevenson sought for his pirates and the essential heroic boy who should circumvent them. Our conception of pirates is almost wholly based on youthful reading. For heroic boys, we seek the model in ourselves, transfigured and capable of anything up to the limits of death or mutilation. In a day or two, the Highland history was forgotten, and on a chill September morning, by the cheek of a brisk fire and the rain drumming on the windows, the liberated boy, in Robert Louis Stevenson, sat down to write the story, The Sea Cook, with a zest and ease he had never experienced before in writing. For a fortnight he wrote at the rate of a chapter a day, and was still in the fury of composition when he had a visitor, a literary fellow countryman, Dr. Alexander Japp, I guess, from London. Somewhat diffidently, Stevenson mentioned the story on hand to Japp, who induced him to read aloud the finished chapters. They pleased the hearer, and he seems to have had no doubt as to the audience they were meant for. Yep. Back sass. 100%. It's like, what you got there, bud? A sound businessman, he suggested that before its publication in book form, something might be made of the story as a serial in Young Folks, and owned and published by a compatriot, James Henderson of Red Lion Court, London. But Dr. Japp left Braemar. He took the manuscript of the first 15 chapters with him for submission to Henderson, who accepted the story without very sanguine hopes of its proving so popular as the tales of his star contributors, Pierce and Alfred R. Phillips, and changed the title to Treasure Island. So it went from The Sea Cook to Treasure Island. Since such an island loomed up in the opening chapter, whereas no sea cook came on deck till chapter 8. The story ran through the paper in 14 installments, inconspicuously placed on the back pages. This fact a sufficient hint to discerning youths of what the editor thought of it. It was published as the work of Captain George North. Stevenson no doubt realized that the name of the author of An Island Voyage would carry no weight with readers of pirate yarns. So he published it under a pseudonym. As has been said, the story as a serial failed to excite much interest, was regarded in fact by the editor as a passenger which did not pay its way. It opened in the Admiral Benbow Inn for far too deliberately and loquaciously for boys who prefer their treasure hunts to start off briskly with jibing and yawing. And the youthful hero Jim Hawkins, in his first-person narrative, Jim Hawkins. Treasure Planet, Jim Hawkins. Oh, wow. You make that connection. Yeah, yep. So Jim Hawkins in Treasure Planet too. Just makes sense. Cook. Yeah. Yeah, okay. So Treasure Planet is like space Treasure Island. Okay. Darn, that would have been a good series. I really wish they'd made those other movies like they were contracted to do. Yeah, there was supposed to be 3 of them. There was only one ever produced, because that was the most I think Disney would let them do. So they produced the other movies. Yeah, me too. I'm sad. The other stories would have been amazing. uh, Jim Hawkins, in his first person narrative, could not, for modesty's sake, deploy himself sufficiently in rapid scenes of personal daring do. 3 years later, with a few details rewritten and Jim Hawkins made even more modest than he was originally, the story was published as a book to become almost immediately a success, which Stevenson thought might well be worth repeating on the same lines. He subsequently wrote for young folks a second story, The Black Arrow, with a shrewder eye on effective curtains for serial use. And this Tushery was, as a serial, a success, a huge success. Boys began to think there might, after all, be something in this Captain George North. But as the book, The Black Arrow for Grown-ups, has ever remained as much a black as its author knew it to be. Blake? Blague? Treasure Island by way of DuckTales. Yeah, I could see that. Once again, under his own name this time, Stevenson embarked on a heroic youth on adventures through Henderson's paper, David Balfour the Kidnapped. It did not appear serially till 1886, but was begotten, without doubt, during the summer in Braemar, when communion with a child disclosed to Stevenson that mystery, fear, courage, and expectation are strings which, played all properly, will always find vibrations that respond in the heart and imagination of the elemental boy who persists, with any luck at all, in the most grave and reverend seniors. That foreword was written by Neil Monroe. So, like I said, this is the original copy here that I have. It's kind of marked up. Um, Again, that beautiful drawing of the map north. This one you can actually see, I think, a little. Open image, new tab. You can read things a little bit easier. North Inlet, Rock Cove, White Rock, Skeleton Island, Foul Ground. Oh, that's what that said. The Mizzenmast Hill, Handbow Line Head, Spyglass Hill, Cape of Ye Woods. A scale of 3 English miles. So the island isn't that big. Treasure Island, August 7th of that would have been 1850. Yeah. RL for Robert Louis. Given by and above by Master of Walter Green's Yarhanen this 20th July of 1754, WB. That's interesting. Da-da-da. So, as I said, I'm going to be reading from a different edition of the novel. I just really wanted to read that forward because it's, well, one, it's beautiful, and two, it's just, it's got a little more character to it, I think. I like books with a little more character. Okay, so let's go here. Make it fit a little bit better. So I'm going to be going back and forth because in this edition, while it's very nice and very clear and very easy to read from, it A, did not have the forward, and B, doesn't have these amazing, beautiful like images from one of the hand-drawn versions. So the old sea dog at the Admiral Benbow. This is the beginning of the chapter, and the Gutenberg project is beautiful. They have all of these amazing images from the original printed version, but the version that the Library of Congress did not have any of this. And it's like, no, I need these. These are really good. So, okay, bear with me a second. Ba-ba-da, da-da-da-da-da-da. Okay, I think it's centered now, so this will work. Treasure Island, as written by Robert Louis Stevenson. Part 1, The Old Buccaneer. Chapter 1, The Old Sea Dog at the Admiral Benbow. this picture here, the Admiral Benbow Inn. Squire Trelawney, Dr. Livesey, and the rest of these gentlemen having asked me to write down the whole particulars about Treasure Island from the beginning to the end, keep nothing back but the bearing of the island, and that only because there is still treasure not yet lifted. I take up my pen in the year of grace 17 and go back to the time when my father kept the Admiral Benbow Inn, and the brown old seaman with the sabre cut first took up his lodging under our roof. Oh, well, you know what would make this even better? If I wore a hat. Yeah, I'm gonna wear the hat. I remember him as if it were yesterday, as he came plodding to the inn door, his sea chest following behind him in a hand barrow, a tall, strong, heavy, nut-brown man, his tarry pigtail falling over the shoulders of his soiled blue coat. His hands ragged and scarred with black broken nails, and the sabre cut across one cheek, a dirty, livid white. I remember him looking round the cove and whistling to himself as he did so, and then breaking out in the old sea song that he sang so often afterward. 15 men on the dead man's chest, yo ho ho, and a bottle of rum. In the high, old, tottering voice that seemed to have been tuned and broken as the capstan bars. Then he rapped on the door with a bit of a stick like a handspike that he carried, and when my father appeared, called roughly for a glass of rum. This, when it was brought to him, he drank slowly, like a connoisseur lingering on the taste and still looking about him at the cliffs and up at our signboard. "This is a handy cove," says he, at length, "and a pleasant sitiated grog shop. Much company, mate?" My father told him no, very little company, the more was the pity. "Well then," said he, "this is the birth of me. Here you, matey," he cried to the man who trundled the barrow, "bring up alongside and help up my chest. I'll stay here a bit," he continued. "I'm a plain man. Rum and bacon and eggs is what I want. Rum and bacon and eggs. What a breakfast. It's like bacon and eggs. Oh, and rum. And rum. We need rum for breakfast. My goodness. Rum and bacon and eggs is what I want. And that head up there for to watch ships off. What you might call me, you might call me captain. Oh, I see what you're at there." And he threw down 3 or 4 gold pieces on the threshold. "You can tell me when I've worked through that," says he, looking as fierce as any commander. And indeed, bad as his clothes were, and coarsely as he spoke, he had none of the appearance of a man who sailed before the mast, but seemed like a mate or a skipper, accustomed to be obeyed or to strike. The man who came with the barrow told us the mail had set him down the morning before at the Royal George, that he had inquired what inns there were along the coast, and hearing ours well spoken of, I suppose, and described as lonely, had chosen it from the others for his place of residence. And that was all we could learn of our guest. He was a very silent man by custom. All day he hung round the cove or upon the cliffs with a brass telescope. All evening he sat in the corner of the parlor next the fire. Next the fire. Oh, killing me, Lewis. Next the fire, and drank rum and water very strong. Mostly he would not speak when spoken to, only look up sudden and fierce, and blow through his nose like a foghorn. That would have been a sound. And we and the people who came about our house soon learned to let him be. Every day, when he came back from his stroll, he would ask if any seafaring men had gone by along the road. At first, We thought it was the want of company of his own kind that made him ask this question. But at last we began to see he was desirous to avoid them. When a seaman put up at the Admiral Benbow, as now and then some did, making by the coast road for Bristol, he would look in at him through the curtained door before he entered the parlor, and he was always sure to be as silent as a mouse when any such was present. For me, at least, there was no secret about the matter, for I was, in a way, a sharer in his alarms. He had taken me aside one day and promised me a silver fourpenny on the first of every month if I would only keep my weather eye open for seafaring man with one leg, and let him know the moment he appeared. Often, often enough, when the first of the month came round and I applied to him for my wage, he would only blow through his nose at me and stare me down. But before the week was out, he was sure to think better of it, bring me my fourpenny pence, and repeat his orders to look out for the seafaring man with one leg. How the personage haunted my dreams, I need scarcely tell you. On stormy nights, when the wind shook the four corners of the house and the surf roared along the cove and up the cliffs, I would see him in 1,000 forms and with 1,000 diabolical expressions. Now the leg would be cut off at the knee, now at the hip. Now he was a monstrous kind of creature who had never had but the one leg, and that in the middle of his body. To see him leap and run and pursue me over hedge and ditch was the worst of nightmares, and altogether I paid pretty dear for my monthly fourpenny pence, in the shape of these abominable fancies. But though I was so terrified by the idea of the seafaring man with one leg, I was far less afraid of the captain himself than anybody else who knew him. There were nights when he took a deal more rum and water than his head would carry, and then he would sometimes sit and sing his wicked old wild sea songs, minding nobody. But sometimes he would call for glasses round, and force all the trembling company to listen to his stories or bear a chorus to his singing. Often I have heard the house shaking with yo ho ho and a bottle of rum, all the neighbors all the neighbors joining in for dear life. Yo ho ho and a bottle of rum. All the neighbors joining in for dear life, with the fear of death upon them, and each singing louder than the other to avoid remark. For in these fits, he was the most overriding companion ever known. He would slap his hand on the table for silence all round. He would fly up in a passion of anger at a question, or sometimes become because none was put, and so he judged the company was not following his story. Nor would he allow anyone to leave the inn till he had drunk himself sleepy and reeled off to bed. His stories were what frightened people worst of all. Dreadful stories they were, about hanging and walking the plank, and storms at sea, and the dry Tortugas, and wild deeds in places on the Spanish Main. By his own account, he must have lived his life among some of the wickedest men that God ever allowed upon the sea. And the language in which he told these stories shocked our plain country people almost as much as the crimes that he described. My father was always saying the inn would be ruined, for people would soon cease coming there to be tyrannized over and put down, and sent shivering to their beds. But I really believe his presence did us good. People were frightened at the time, but on looking back, they rather liked it. It was a fine excitement in a quiet country life, and there was even a party of the younger men who pretended to admire him, calling him a true sea dog and a real old salt, and such like names, and saying there was a sort of man that made England terrible at sea. In one way, indeed, he bade fair to ruin us, for he kept on staying week after week, and at last month after month, so that all the money had been long exhausted, and still my father never plucked up the heart to insist on having more. If ever he mentioned it, the captain blew through his nose so loudly that you might that you might say he roared and stared at my poor father out of the room. I have seen him wringing his hands after such a rebuff, and I am sure the annoyance and the terror he lived in must have greatly hastened his early and unhappy death. All the time he lived with us, the captain made no change whatever in his dress, but to buy some stockings. Oh gosh, what did I hit? I hit something. Oh no. What have I done? I broke it. There we go. Did I fix it? I think I fixed it. Panic! Panic! Oh no! What have I done? Oh no.
Drink water.
Yeah, you're right.
Don't be suspicious. Don't be suspicious. Don't be suspicious. Don't be suspicious.
It was intentional the whole time. Yes. All right, let's grab this real quick. I hate it when the picture is a sideways like that. So give me a second. I'll grab that here. Da 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 da. Here we go. Ah, yes. This is him up on the top there, up on the cliffs with his brass telescope. It's not going to do him much good under his arm, but he had it with him. So all day he hung round the cove or upon the cliffs with a brass telescope. I guess it didn't specify that he was looking through the telescope. I would have just assumed that he was, but there you go. Let's see here. Okay, we're not quite to that one yet. All the time he lived with us, the captain made no change whatever in his dress, but to buy some stockings from a hawker. One of the cocks of his hat. Oh no. One of the cocks of his hat having fallen down, he let it hang from that day forth, though it was a great annoyance when it blew. I remember the appearance of his coat, and which before the end was nothing but patches. He never wrote or received a letter, and he never spoke with any but the neighbors, and with these, for the most part, only when drunk on rum. The great sea chest none of us had ever seen open. He was only once crossed, and that was toward the end, when my poor father was far gone in a decline that took him off. Dr. Livesey came late one afternoon to see the patient, took a bit of dinner from my mother, and went into the parlor to smoke a pipe until his horse should come down from the hamlet, for we had no stabling at the old Benbow. I followed him in, and I remember observing the contrast, the neat, bright doctor, with his powder as white as snow, and his bright black eyes and pleasant manners made with coltish country folk, with the coltish country folk. What a sentence. Coltish. With the coltish country folk, and above all with the filthy, heavy, bleared scarecrow of a pirate of ours, sitting far gone in rum, with his arms on the table. Suddenly he, the captain, that is, began to pipe up his eternal song. 15 men on the dead man's chest, yo ho ho, and a bottle of rum. Drink and the devil had done for the rest, yo ho ho, and a bottle of rum. At first I had supposed the dead man's chest to be the that identical box of his upstairs in the front room, and the thought had been mingled in my nightmares with that of the one-legged seafaring man. But by this time we had all long ceased to pay any particular notice to the song. Grab that. Where was I? It was new that night to nobody but Dr. Livesey, and on him I observed it did not produce an agreeable effect. For he looked up for a moment quite angrily before he went on with his talk to old Taylor, the gardener, on a new cure for the rheumatics. In the meantime, the captain gradually brightened up at his own music, and at last flapped his hand upon the table, before in a way we all knew to mean silence. The voices stopped at once, all but Dr. Livesey's. He went on as before, speaking clear and kind, and drawing briskly at his pipe between every word or two. The captain glared at him for a while, flapped his hand again, glared still harder, and at last broke out with a villainous low oath, "Silence there, between decks!" "Were you addressing me, sir?" says the doctor. And when the ruffian had told him with another oath that this was so, "I have only one thing to say to you, sir," replies the doctor, "that if you keep on drinking rum, the world will soon be quit of a very dirty scoundrel." The old fellow's fury was awful. He sprang to his feet, drew and opened a sailor's clasp knife, and balancing it open on the palm of his hand, threatened to pin the doctor to the wall. The doctor never so much as moved. He spoke to him as before over his shoulder, and in the same tone of voice, rather high so that all the room might hear, but perfectly calm and steady. "If you do not put that knife this instant in your pocket, I promise, upon my honor, you shall hang at next assizes." Then followed a battle of looks between them, but the captain soon knuckled under, put up his weapon, and resumed his seat, grumbling like a beaten dog. "And now, sir," continued the doctor, "since I now know there's such a fellow in my district, you may count I'll have an eye upon you day and night. I'm not a doctor only, I'm a magistrate, and if I catch a breath of complaint against you, if it's only for a piece of incivility like tonight's, I'll take effectual means to have you hunted down and routed out of this. Let that suffice." Soon after, Dr. Livesey's horse came to the door, and he rode away, but the captain held his peace that evening, and for many evenings to come. He's like, "Oh, shit, the magistrate's paying attention to me. I should probably not say anything." So that is the first chapter, and we are about an hour's worth into the stream, so I'm going to go ahead and throw us into a Be Right Back, and that way we can run that 3-minute ad, and I will be right back. Okay, and we are back. So we are on to chapter 2. Black Dog appears and disappears. It was not very long after this that there occurred the first of the mysterious events that rid us at last of the captain, though not, as you will see, of his affairs. It was a bitter, cold winter with long, hard frosts and heavy gales, and it was plain from the first that my poor father was little likely to see the spring. He sank daily, and my mother and I had all the inn upon our hands, and were kept busy enough without paying much regard to our unpleasant guest. It was one January morning, very early, a pinching, frosty morning, the cove all grey with hoar-frost, the ripple lapping softly on the stones, the sun still low and only touching the hilltops and shining far to seaward. The captain had risen earlier than usual and set out down the beach, his cutlass swinging under the broad skirts of the old blue coat, his brass telescope under his arm, his hat tilted back upon his head. I remember his breath hanging like smoke in his wake as he strode off. And the last sound I heard of him as he turned the big rock was a loud snort of indignation, as though his mind was still running upon Dr. Livesey. I'm gonna close that, open this. Do we have? So that shot of the doctor, I'm gonna open this new tab. The doctor talking to him and with his knife out. This is that shot here. If you do not put that knife this instant in your pocket, you shall hang at the next assize. I'm assizes? Diseases? Diseases? I don't know. My guess. No idea. I'm kind of curious what that word is. Today we learned assize. Assize. Interesting. A court which formerly sat at intervals in each country of England and Wales to administer the civil and criminal law. In 1972, the civil jurisdiction of assizes was transferred to the High Court and the criminal jurisdiction to the Crown Court. The more you know. Today I learned assize. But I love this beautiful inked crosscut here. So with they've got the hatching and all the different textures layered upon each other to give it like depth and just like texture, depth, it makes the image really interesting. Got the earring on the ear and the tricorner hat and the patched blue coat and his knife. Mad because people aren't listening to him because he's drunk on rum. Live your best life. The captain. Well, Mother was upstairs with Father, and I was laying the breakfast table against the captain's return when the parlor door opened and a man stepped in on whom I had never set my eyes before. He was a pale, tallowy creature wanting 2 fingers of the left hand, and though he wore a cutlass, he did not look much like a fighter. I had always my eye open for seafaring men, with 1 leg or 2, and I remember this one puzzled me. He was not sailorly, and yet he had a smack of the sea about him. I asked him what was for his service, and he said he would take rum. But as I was going out of the room to fetch it, he sat down upon a table and motioned me to draw near. I paused where I was with my napkin in my hand. "Come here, sonny," says he. "Come nearer here." I took a step nearer. "Is this here table for my mate Bill?" he asked, with a kind of leer. I told him I did not know his mate Bill, and this was for a person who stayed in our house, whom we called the captain. Well, said he, my mate Bill would be called the captain as like as not. He has a cut on one cheek in a mighty pleasant way with him, particularly in drink. Has my mate Bill? We'll put it for argument like that your captain has a cut on one cheek, and we'll put it, if you like, that that cheek's the right one. Ah, well, I told you, now, is my mate Bill in this here house? I told him he was out walking. Which way, sonny? Which way is he gone? And when I had pointed out the rock and told him how the captain was likely to return, and how soon, and answered a few other questions, ah, said he, this'll be as good as drink to my mate Bill. The expression of his face as he said these words was not at all pleasant, and I had my own reasons for thinking that the stranger was mistaken, even supposing he meant what he said, but it was no affair of mine, I thought, and besides, it was difficult to know what to do. The stranger kept hanging about just inside the inn door, peering round the corner like a cat waiting for a mouse. Once I stepped out myself into the road, but he immediately called me back, and as I did not obey quick enough for his fancy, a most horrible change came over his tallowy face, and he ordered me in, and with an oath that made me jump. As soon as I sat as soon as I was back again, he returned to his former manner, half fawning, half sneering, patted me on the shoulder, told me I was a good boy, and he had taken quite a fancy to me. Oh, that's terrifying. I have a son of my own, said he, as like you as 2 blocks, and he's all the pride of my heart, my art, my art. But the great thing for boys is discipline, sonny, discipline. Now, if you had sailed along of Bill, you wouldn't have stood there to be spoke to twice. Not you. That was never Bill's way, nor the way of Sitch? Okay. Nor the way of Sitch as sailed with him. And here, sure enough, is my mate Bill, with a spyglass under his arm. Bless his old art, to be sure. You and me'll just go back to the parlor, sonny, and get behind the door, and we'll give Bill a little surprise. Bless his art, I say again. So saying, the stranger backed along with me into the parlor and put me behind him in the corner, so that we were both hidden by the open door. I was very uneasy and alarmed, as you may fancy, and it rather added to my fears to observe that the stranger was certainly frightened himself. He cleared the hilt of his cutlass and loosened the blade in the sheath, and all the time we were waiting there he kept swallowing as if he felt what we used to call a lump in his throat, in the throat. At last in strode the captain, slammed the door behind him without looking to the right or left, and marched straight across the room to where his breakfast awaited him. Bill, said the stranger in a voice that I thought he had tried to make bold and big. The captain spun round on his heel and fronted us. All the brown had gone out of his face, and even his nose was blue. He had the look of a man who sees a ghost, or the evil one, or something worse. Something worse than the evil one? Okay, sure. If anything can be, and upon my word, I felt sorry to see him all in a moment turn so old and sick. Come, Bill, you know me, you know an old shipmate, Bill, surely, said the stranger. The captain made a sort of gasp. Black dog, said he. And who else? Returned the other, getting more at his ease. Black dog as ever was, come for to see his old shipmate Billy at the Admiral Benbow Inn. Ah, Bill, Bill, we have seen a sight of times, us two, since I lost them 2 talons, holding up his mutilated hand. Now look here, said the captain. You've run me down. Here I am. Well then, speak up. What is it? That's you, Bill, returned the black dog. You're in the right of it, Billy. I'll have a glass of rum from this dear child here, as I've took such a liking to, and we'll sit down, if you please, and talk square, like old shipmates. When I returned with the rum, they were already seated on either side of the captain's breakfast table, Black Dog's Black Dog next to the door and sitting sideways so as to have an eye on his old shipmate and one, as I thought, on his retreat. He bade me go and leave the door wide open. "None of your keyholes for me, sonny," he said, and I left them together and retired into the bar. For a long time, though, I certainly did my best to listen. I could hear nothing but a low gabbling. But at last the voices began to grow higher, and I could pick up a word or two, mostly oaths, from the captain. "No, no, 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 and an end of it!" he cried once. And again, "If it comes to swinging, swing all, say I." Then all of a sudden there was a tremendous explosion of oaths and other noises. The chair and the table went over in a lump. A clash of steel followed, and then a cry of pain. And the next instant I saw Black Dog in full flight, and the captain hotly pursuing, both with drawn cutlasses, and the former streaming blood from the left shoulder. Just at the door, the captain aimed at the fugitive one last tremendous cut, which would certainly have split him to the chine had it not been intercepted by our big signboard of Admiral Benbow. You may see the notch on the lower side of the frame to this day. That blow was the last of the battle. Once out upon the road, the Black Dog, in spite of his wound, showed a wonderful clean pair of heels and disappeared over the edge of the hill in half a minute. The captain, for his part, stood staring at the signboard like a bewildered man. Then he passed his hand over his eyes several times and at last turned back into the house. "Jim," says he, "rum." And as he spoke, he reeled a little and caught himself with one hand against the wall. "Are you hurt?" cried I. "Rum," he repeated. "I must get away from here. Rum, rum!" I ran to fetch it, but I was quite unsteadied by all that had fallen out, and I broke one glass and fouled the tap. And while I was still getting in my own way, I heard a loud fall in the parlor, and running in, beheld the captain lying full length upon the floor. At the same instant, my mother, alarmed by the cries and fighting, came running downstairs to help me. Between us, we raised his head. He was breathing very loud and hard, but his eyes were closed and his face a horrible color. "Dear, dearie me," cried my mother, "what a disgrace upon the house, and your poor father sick." In the meantime, we had no idea what to do to help the captain, nor any other thought but that he had got his death hurt in the scuffle with the stranger. I got the rum, to be sure, and tried to put it down his throat, but his teeth were tightly shut and his jaws as strong as iron. It was a happy relief for us when the door opened and Dr. Livesey came in on his visit to my father. "Oh, doctor," we cried, "what shall we do? Where is he wounded?" "Wounded? A fiddlestick's end?" said the doctor. "No more wounded than you or I. The man has had a stroke, as I warned him. Now, Mrs. Hawkins, just you run upstairs to your husband and tell him, if possible, nothing about it. For my part, I must do my best to save this fellow's trebly worthless life. And Jim here will get me a basin." When I got back with the basin, the doctor had already ripped up the captain's sleeve and exposed his great sinewy arm. It was tattooed in several places. "Here's luck, a fair wind, and Billy Bones, his fancy," were very neatly and clearly executed on the forearm, and up near the shoulder there was a sketch of a gallows and a man hanging from it, done, as I thought, with great spirit. "Prophetic," said the doctor, touching this picture with his finger. "And now, Master Billy Bones, if that be your name, we'll have a look at the color of your blood. Jim," he said, "are you afraid of blood?" "No, sir," said I. "Well then," said he, "you hold the basin." And with that he took his lancet and opened a vein. A great deal of blood was taken before the captain opened his eyes and looked mistily about. First, he recognized the doctor with an unmistakable frown. Then his glance fell upon me, and he looked relieved. But suddenly his color changed, and he tried to raise himself, crying, "Where's Black Dog?" "There is no black dog here," said the doctor, "except what you have on your own except what you have on your own back. You have been drinking rum. You have had a stroke precisely as I told you, and I have just very much against my own will dragged you head foremost out of the grave. Now, Mr. Bones, that's not my name," he interrupted. "Much I care," returned the doctor. "It's the name of a buccaneer of my acquaintance, and I call you by it for the sake of shortness. And what I have to say to you is this: one glass of rum won't kill you, but if you take one, you'll take another and another, and I stake my wig if you don't break off short, you'll die. Do you understand that? Die and go to your own place like the man in the Bible. Come now, make an effort. I'll help you to your bed for once." Between us, with much trouble, we managed to hoist him upstairs and laid him on his bed, where his head fell back on the pillow as if he were almost fainting. "Now, mind you," said the doctor, "I clear my conscience. The name of rum for you is death." And with that he went off to see my father, taking me with him by the arm. That must be this picture here. Mhm. There was another picture. So this is the picture of him almost hitting Black Dog right here. Like Black Dog getting away, and his and his blade getting stuck in the sign for the building. The next instant I saw Black Dog in full flight. Full heel, as they say. That was kind of cool. So we're almost to the end of the chapter. "This is nothing," he said, as soon as he had closed the door. "I have drawn blood enough to keep him quiet a while. He should lie for a week where he is. That is the best thing for him and you, but another stroke would settle him." So we are between chapters, which I like to remind all of my listeners to stretch, drink water, take a snack, snuggle into your blanket, whatever it is that you do to get comfortable while I'm reading. We went a little over long with the poetry and discussing R.L. Stevenson, and that's okay. I love the history and learning as I go about the man. One of these days, I'm going to get somebody to like write things in a specific order. My brain just gets all over the place, and I get so excited and nervous every time I start a new book because I get to learn about somebody new. Um, I think I'd like to, maybe after the holiday, revisit R.L. Stevenson and maybe do his Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. I think that would be a wonderful book for the winter months. It's not quite Halloween. I feel like it would be Halloween material otherwise, but next year for October, on my 1 year anniversary for the Spooktober Masterpiece series, I'll probably cover the picture of Dorian Gray, and a couple other classical horror films or horror stories as well. Because believe it or not, the two that I chose for the month of October were quite long and rigorous. Mary Shelley's Frankenstein was long at I believe it was like 60,000 pages, but Bram Stoker's Dracula was 161,000 words, and it was a beast. It was amazing and articulate and verbose, however, quite long. And poor Lucy and Mina and everyone else, John Harker, all of those characters. Each had their separate storylines happening simultaneously, which gets a little confusing trying to keep track of who's where, with who, with what doing, what, who this, what. Yeah. Yeah. At least this one seems pretty straightforward. We've got Jim Hawkins, his mother, his father being sick, and then the mysterious captain who may or may not be Bill or Billy. Who knows? But, all right, real quick hydration station. Ah, wonderful. Okay, let's get back to it. Chapter 3 The Black Spot. About noon, I stopped at the captain's door with some cooling drinks and medicines. He was lying very much as we had left him, only a little higher, and he seemed both weak and excited. Jim, he said, you're the only one here that's worth anything, and you know I've always been good to you. Never a month but I've given you a silver fourpenny for yourself. And now you see, mate, I'm pretty low and deserted by all, and Jim, you'll bring me one noggin of rum now, won't you, matey? The doctor, I began, but he broke in, cursing the doctor in a feeble voice, but heartily. Doctors is all swabs, he said. And that doctor there, why, what do he know about seafaring men? I been in places hot as pitch, and mates dropping round with Yellow Jack, and the blessed land a heaving like the sea with earthquakes. What do the doctor know of lands like that? And I lived on rum. I tell you, it's been meat and drink and man and wife to me, and if I'm not to have my rum now, I'm a poor old hulk on a lee shore. But my blood'll be on you, Jim, and that Dr. Swab. And he ran on again for a while with curses. Look, Jim, how my fingers fidges, he continued in the pleading tone. I can't keep 'em still, not I. I haven't had a drop this blessed day. That doctor's a fool, I tell you. If I don't have a drain o' rum, Jim, I'll have the horrors. I seen some of them already. Some on 'em. Oof. I seen some on 'em already. I seen old Flint in the corner behind you as plain as print. I seen him, and if I get the horrors, I'm a man that has lived rough, and I'll raise Cain. Your doctor hisself said one glass wouldn't hurt me. I'll give you a golden guinea for a noggin, Jim. He was growing more and more excited, and this alarmed me for my father, who was very low that day and needed quiet. Besides, I was reassured by the doctor's words now quoted to me, and rather offended by the offer of a bribe. I want none of your money, said I, but what you owe my father. I'll get you one glass and no more. When I brought it to him, he seized it greedily and drank it out. Aye, aye, said he, that's some better, sure enough. And now, matey, did the doctor say how long I was to lie here in this old berth? A week at least, said I. Thunder, he cried, a week! I can't do that. They'll have the black spot on me by then. The lubbers is going about to get the wind of me this blessed moment. Lubbers as couldn't keep what they got, and what want to nail what is another's. Is that seamanly behavior now? I want to know. But I'm saving a soul. I never wasted good money of mine, nor lost it neither. And I'll trick 'em again. I'm not afraid on 'em. I'll shake out another reef, matey, and dawdle 'em again. As he was thus speaking, he had risen from bed with great difficulty, holding to my shoulder with a grip that almost made me cry out, and moving his legs like so much dead weight. His words, spirited as they were in meaning, contrasted sadly with the weakness of the voice in which they were uttered. He paused when he had got into a sitting position on the edge. That doctor's done me in, he murmured. My ears is singing. Lay me back. Before I could do much to help him, he had fallen back again to his former place, where he lay for a while silent. Jim, he said at length, you saw that seafaring man today? Black Dog, I asked. Ah, Black Dog, says he. He's a bad 'un, but there's worse that put him on. Now, if I can't get away nohow, and they tip me the black spot, mind you, it's my old sea chest they're after. You get on a horse you can, can't you? Well, then, you get on a horse and go to, well, yes, I will, to the eternal Dr. Swab and tell him to pipe all hands, magistrates and such, and sich, and he'll lay 'em aboard at the Admiral Benbow. All old Flint's crew, man and boy, all on them, all on 'em that's left. I was first mate, I was. Old Flint's first mate. And I'm the only one, only? I'm gonna go with only. I'm the only one as knows the place. He gave me to Savannah when he lay a-dying, like as if I was to now, you see. But you won't peach unless you get the black spot on me, or unless you see that black dog again, or a seafaring man with one leg, Jim. Him above all. But what is the black spot, Captain? I asked. That's a summons, mate. I'll tell you if they get that, but you keep your weather eye open, Jim, and I'll share with you equals upon my honor. He wandered a little longer, his voice growing weaker, but soon after I had given him his medicine, which he took like a child, with the remark, if ever a seaman wanted drugs, it's me. If ever a seaman wanted drugs, it's me. Give me the rum, Jim. He fell at last into a heavy, swoon-like sleep, in which I left him. What I should have done had all gone well, I do not know. Probably I should have told the whole story to the doctor, for I was in mortal fear lest the captain should repent of his confessions, and make an end of me. But as things fell out, my poor father died quite suddenly that evening, which put all other matters on one side. Our natural our natural distress, the visits of the neighbors, the arranging of the funeral, and all the work of the inn to be carried to be carried on in the meanwhile kept me so busy that I scarcely time to think of the captain, far less to be afraid of him. He got downstairs next morning, to be sure, and had his meals as usual, though he ate little, and had more, I am afraid, than his usual supply of rum, for he helped himself out of the bar, scowling and blowing through his nose, and no one dared to cross him. On the night before the funeral, he was as drunk as ever, and it was shocking, in that house of mourning, to hear him singing away at his ugly old sea-song. But weak as he was, we were all in fear of death for him, and the doctor was suddenly taken up with a case many miles away, and was never near the house after my father's death. I have said the captain was weak, and indeed he seemed rather to grow weaker than regain his strength. He clambered up and down stairs, and went from the parlor to the bar and back again, and sometimes put his nose out of doors to smell the sea, holding on to the walls as he went for support, and breathing hard and fast like a man on a steep mountain. He never particularly addressed me, and it is my belief he had as good as forgotten his confidences. But his temper was more flighty, and allowing for his bodily weakness, more violent than ever. He had an alarming way now, when he was drunk, of drawing his cutlass and laying it bare before him on the table. But with all that he minded people less, and seemed shut up in his own thoughts, and rather wandering. Once, for instance, to our extreme wonder, he piped up to a different air, a kind of country love song that he must have learned in his youth before he had begun to follow the sea. Grab that picture here. Oh, this hasn't happened yet, I don't think. Oh, this is another picture of the doctor talking to the captain about putting his knife away. That's a different, this one from this novel. That's cool. A little late in the chapter, but whatever. Yes. So things passed until the day after the funeral. And about 3 o'clock of a bitter, foggy, frosty afternoon, I was standing at the door for a moment, full of sad thoughts about my father, when I saw someone drawing slowly near along the road. He was plainly built. He was plain. He was plainly blind. Built. He was built. He was plainly blind, for he tapped before him with a stick and wore a great green shade over his eyes and nose. But he was hunched, as if with age or weakness, and wore a huge old tattered sea cloak with a hood that made him appear positively deformed. I never saw in my life a more dreadful looking figure. He stopped a little from the inn and, raising his voice in an odd sing-song, addressed the air in front of him. Will any kind friend inform a poor blind man who has lost the precious sight of his eyes in the gracious defense of his native country, England, and God bless King George, where or in what part of this country he may now be? You are at the Admiral Benbow, Black Hill Cove, my good man, said I. I hear a voice, said he, a young voice. Will you give me your hand, my kind young friend, and lead me in? I held out my hand, and the horrible, soft-spoken, eyeless creature gripped it in a moment like a vice. I was so much startled that I struggled to withdraw, but the blind man pulled me close up to him with a single action of his arm. Now, boy, he said, take me into the captain. Sir, said I, upon my word, I dare not. Oh, he sneered, that's it. Take me in straight, or I'll break your arm. I think there was a picture of that, actually. The black spot. Here we are. Here we go. The old man. At one look, the rum went out of him and left him staring sober. Oh, this is the blind man with the hood covering him. Okay, so this hasn't happened yet. Boop. And he gave it as he spoke a wrench that made me cry out. Sir, said I, it is for yourself, I mean. The captain is not what he used to be. He sits with a drawn cutlass, another gentleman. Come now, March, interrupted he, and I never heard a voice so cruel and cold and ugly as that blind man's. It cowed me more than the pain, and I began to obey him at once, walking straight in at the door and toward the parlor, where our sick old buccaneer was sitting, dazed with rum. The blind man clung close to me, holding me in one iron fist, and leaning almost more of his weight on me than I could carry. Lead me straight up to him, and when I'm in view, cry out, here's a friend for you, Bill. If you don't, I'll do this. And with that, he gave me a twitch that I thought would have made me faint. Between this and that, I was so utterly terrified of the blind beggar that I forgot my terror of the captain. And as I opened the parlor door, cried out the words he had ordered in the trembling voice. The poor captain raised his eyes, and at one look the rum went out of him and left him staring sober. Oh, okay, so that's that picture there. I just imagine Jim Hawkins being younger than as depicted here. It's kind of interesting because here he definitely looks like a young man. I'd say like between anywhere from as old as maybe 16, 17, maybe as young as like 15. Either way, kind of young, kind of older than a child. So this old man had quite the grip. Now, Bill, sit where you are, said the beggar. If I can't see, I can't hear a finger stirring. I can hear a finger stirring. Business is business. Hold out your left hand. Boy, boy, take his left hand by the wrist and bring it near to my right. We both obeyed him to the letter, and I saw him pass something from the hollow of the hand that held his stick into the palm of the captain's, which closed upon it instantly. And now that's done, said the blind man, and at the words he suddenly left hold of me, and with incredible accuracy and nimbleness skipped out of the parlor and into the road, where, as I still stood motionless, I could hear his stick go tap, tap, tapping into the distance. It went a rap, rap, rapping at my chamber door. It was some time before either I or the captain seemed to gather our senses, but at length and about at the same time I released his wrist, which I was still holding, and he drew in his hand and looked sharply into the palm. 10 o'clock, he cried. 6 hours. We'll do them yet. And he sprang to his feet. Even as he did so, he reeled, put his hand to his throat, stood swaying for a moment, and then, with a peculiar sound, fell from his whole height face foremost to the floor. I ran to him at once, calling to my mother, but haste was all in vain. The captain had been struck dead by thundering apocalypse. Apoplexy? Apoplexy. That is a word. Apoplexy. To the internet. Blah, 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 blah. Can I spell? Apoplexy. Unconscious or incapacity resulting from a cerebral hemorrhage or stroke. Oh no! The captain! He had another stroke! All right. Da, 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 da. The captain had been struck dead by thundering apoplexy. It is a curious thing to understand, for I had certainly never liked the man, though of late I had begun to pity him. But as soon as I saw that he was dead, I burst into a flood of tears. It was the second death I had known, and the sorrow of the first was still fresh in my heart. Aw, Jim. Poor Jim. His father, and then, the only other man that's in his life. That's rough, bud. That's rough. We are between chapters. Yeah, he was done in face foremost, straight to the floor. Can you imagine? Just dead as a doornail, just wham! Right into the floor. Oof. Rough. That would be rough. We are between chapters. So, for any new listeners here, one of the things I like to do is talk about how we should all be hydrated. We should have snacks if we need to. Get up and stretch. I forget to stretch, but that's what this community is for, to remind me.
Water.
Hydrate. Yes, you got it. So I'm a beverage goblin. So if you don't know what that means, in a nutshell, I usually have between 2 to 3 beverages at any given time. I am out of caffeine, and I'm unable to go get any more right at this minute. But what I have here, Valis, is I have my spicy mango, the spicy mango chili water, regular water with no flavor. And what is this? It is basic Birkenstocks from Girdwood Brewing, and it is a pumpkin spiced lager. Man, everything I drink has got pumpkin in it if given half the chance. Oh, it's spicy. Woo! The mango hits different. That's good. I haven't had this in a while. I've been drinking a lot of the watermelon salt or the citrus salt, but this mango one's pretty good. And we return to the book. Wonderful. Okay, let's see. We are on to chapter 4. We are going to read and tell either a natural pause in the story, because there is there's basically 3 sections of the book. essentially. Does it break it down here? So we have okay, here's the 6 sections. So we have part 1, which is all about the old buccaneer, i.e., the captain. Then we have part 2, the sea cook. Part 3, the shore adventure. Part 4, the stockade, yada, yada, yada. So we are currently in part 1, or the first block of the book. So we'll see how far that gets us through part 1. And then if that gets us through the next hour, I might start into part 2 if we still have time left remaining in the hour. Otherwise, we will save part 2 for next, the day after Thanksgiving. So let's get cracking on chapter 4, and there are 6 chapters in part 1. So, chapter 4, The Sea Chest. I lost no time, of course, in telling my mother all that I knew, and perhaps should have told her long before, and we saw ourselves at once in a difficult and dangerous position. Some of the man's money, if he had any, was clearly due to us, but it was not likely that our captain's shipmates, above all the 2 specimens seen by me, Black Dog and the blind beggar, would be inclined to give up their booty in payment of the dead man's debts. The captain's order to mount at once and ride for Dr. Livesey would have left my mother alone and unprotected, which was not to be thought of. Indeed, it seemed impossible for either of us to remain much longer in the house. The fall of coals in the kitchen grate, the very ticking of the clock filled us with alarms. The neighborhood, to our ears, seemed haunted by approaching footsteps, and what between the dead body of the captain on the parlor floor and the thought of that detestable blind beggar hovering near at hand and ready to return, there were moments when, as the saying goes, I jumped in my skin for terror. Something must speedily be resolved upon, and it occurred to us at last to go forth together and seek help in the neighboring hamlet. No sooner said than done. Bareheaded as we were, we ran out at once in the gathering evening and the frosty fog. The hamlet lay not many 100 yards away, though out of view, on the other side of the next cove. And what greatly encouraged me, it was in an opposite direction from whence the blind man had made his appearance, and whither he had presumably returned. We were not many minutes on the road, though we sometimes stopped to lay hold of each other and hearken. But there was no unusual sound, nothing but the low wash of the ripple and the croaking of the crows in the wood. It was already candlelight. Let me put this here. It was already candlelight when we reached the hamlet, and I shall never forget how much I cheered to see the yellow shine in doors and windows, but that, as it proved, was the best. Give me a second. But that, as it proved, was the best of the help we were likely to get in that quarter, for you would have thought men would have been ashamed of themselves. No soul would consent to return with us to the Admiral Benbow. The more we told of our troubles, the more, man, woman, and child, they clung to the shelter of their houses. The name of Captain Flint, though it was strange to me, was well enough known to some there, and carried a great weight of terror. Some of the men who had been to field work on the far side of the Admiral Benbow remembered, besides, to have seen several strangers on the road, and taking them to be smugglers, to have bolted away. And one at least had seen a little lugger in what we call Kit's Hole. For that matter, anyone who was a comrade of the captain's was enough to frighten them to death. And the short and the long of the matter was that while we could get several who were willing enough to ride to Dr. Livesey's, which lay in another direction, not one would help us to defend the inn. They say cowardice is infectious, But then argument is, on the other hand, a great emboldener. And so, when each had said his say, my mother made them a speech. She would not, she declared, lose money that belonged to her fatherless boy. If none of the rest of you dare, she said, Jim and I dare. Back we will go the way we came, and small thanks to you big, hulking, chicken-hearted men. We'll have that chest open if we die for it. And I'll thank you for that bag, Mrs. Crossley, to bring back our lawful money in. Of course, I said I would go with my mother, and of course they all cried out at our foolhardiness. But even then, not a man would go along with us. All all they would do was to give me a loaded pistol lest we were attacked, and to promise to have horses ready saddled, in case we were pursued on our return, while one lad was to ride forward to the doctor's in search of armed assistance. My heart was beating finely when we two set forth in the cold night upon this dangerous venture. A full moon was beginning to rise and peered readily through the upper edges of the fog, and this increased our haste. For it was plain before we came forth again that all would be as bright as day, and our departure exposed to the eyes of any watchers. We slipped along the hedges noiseless and swift, nor did we see or hear anything to increase our terrors, till to our huge relief the door of the Admiral Benbow had closed behind us. I slipped the bolt at once, and we stood and panted for a moment in the dark, alone in the house with the dead captain's body. Then my mother got a candle in the bar, and holding each other's hands, we advanced into the parlor. He lay as we had left him, on his back, with his eyes open and one arm stretched out. Draw down the blind, Jim, whispered my mother. They might come and watch outside. And now, said she, when I had done so, we have to get the key off that. And who's to touch it? I should like to know. And she gave a kind of sob as she said the words. I went down on my knees at once. On the floor, close to his hand, there was a little round of paper, blackened on the one side. I could not doubt that this was the black spot, and taking it up, I found written on the other side in very good, clear hand this short message. You have till 10 tonight. He had till 10, mother, said I, and just as I said it, our clock began striking. This sudden noise startled us shockingly, but the news was good, for it was only 6. Now, Jim, she said, that key. I felt in his pockets, one after another, a few small coins, a thimble, and some thread, and big needles. A piece of pigtail tobacco bitten away at the end, his gully with the crooked handle, a pocket compass, a tinder box, were all that they contained, and I began to despair. Perhaps it's round his neck, suggested my mother. Overcoming a strong repugnance, I tore open his shirt at the neck, and there, sure enough, hanging to a bit of tarry string, which I cut with his own gully, we found the key. At this triumph we were filled with hope and hurried upstairs without delay to the little room where he had slept so long and where his box had stood since the day of his arrival. It was like any other seaman's chest on the outside, the initial B burned on the top of it with a hot iron, and the corners somewhat smashed and broken as by long rough usage. Give me the key, said my mother, and though the lock was very stiff, she had turned it and thrown back the lid in a twinkling. A strong smell of tobacco and tar rose from the interior, but nothing was to be seen on the top except a suit of very good clothes, carefully brushed and folded. They had never been worn, my mother said. Under that the miscellany began, a quadrant, a tin cannikin, several sticks of tobacco, 2 brace of very handsome pistols, a piece of bar silver, an old Spanish watch, and some other trinkets of little value and mostly of foreign make, a pair of compasses mounted with brass, and 5 or 6 curious West Indian shells. It has often set me thinking since that he should have carried about these shells with him in his wandering guilty. in his wandering, guilty, and hunted life. In the meantime, we had found nothing of any value but the silver and the trinkets, and neither of these were in our way. Underneath there was an old boat cloak, whitened with sea salt, on many a harbor bar. My mother pulled it up with impatience, and there lay before us the last things in the chest. A bundle tied up in oilcloth and looking like papers, and a canvas bag that gave forth at a touch the jingle of gold. "I'll show these rogues that I'm an honest woman," said my mother. "I'll have my dues, and not a farthing over. Hold Mrs. Crossley's bag." And she began to count over the amount of the captain's score from the sailor's bag into the one that I was holding. It was a long, difficult business, for the coins were of all countries and sizes, doubloons and louis d'ors and guineas and pieces of 8, and I knew not what besides, all shaken together at random. The guineas, too, were about the scarcest, and it was with these only that my mother knew how to make her count. When we were about halfway through, I suddenly put my hand upon her arm, for I had heard in the silent, frosty air a sound that brought my heart into my mouth. The tapping of the blind man's stick upon the frozen road. It drew nearer and nearer while we sat holding our breath. Then it struck sharp on the inn door, and then we could hear the handle being turned and the bolt rattling as the wretched being tried to enter. And then there was a long time of silence both within and without. At last the tapping recommenced, and to our indescribable joy and gratitude died slowly away again until it ceased to be heard. "Mother," said I, "take the whole and let's be going," for I was sure the bolted door must have seemed suspicious, and would bring the whole hornet's nest about our ears. Though how thankful I was that I had bolted it, none could tell who had never met that terrible blind man. But my mother, frightened as she was, would not consent to take a fraction more than was due to her, and was obstinately unwilling to be content with less. It was not yet 7, she said. By a long way she knew her rights, and she would have them, and she was still arguing with me when a little low whistle sounded a good way off upon the hill. That was enough, and more than enough, for both of us. "I'll take what I have," she said, jumping to her feet. "And I'll take this to square the count," said I, picking up the oilskin packet. Next moment we were both groping downstairs, leaving the candle by the empty chest. And the next we had opened the door and were in full retreat. We had not started a moment too soon. The fog was rapidly dispersing. Already the moon shone quite clear on the high ground on either side. It was only in the exact bottom of the dell and round the tavern door that a thin veil still hung unbroken to conceal the first steps of our escape. Far less than halfway to the hamlet, very little beyond the bottom of the hill, we must come forth into the moonlight. Nor was this all, for the sound of several footsteps running came already to our ears, and as we looked back in their direction, a light tossing to and fro and still rapidly advancing, showed that one of the newcomers carried a lantern. "My dear," said my mother suddenly, "take the money and run on. I am going to faint." This was certainly the end for both of us, I thought. How I cursed the cowardice of the neighbors, how I blamed my poor mother for her honesty and her greed, for her past foolhardiness and present weakness. We were just at the little bridge by good fortune, and I helped her, tottering as she was, to the edge. Let's see. Interesting. Open image. Okay. On the edge of the bank, where sure enough she gave a sigh and fell on my shoulder. I do not know how I found the strength to do it at all, and I am afraid it was roughly done, but I managed to drag her down the bank and a little way under the arch. Further, I could not move her, for the bridge was too low to let me do more than crawl below it. But there we had to stay, my mother almost entirely exposed, and both of us within earshot of the inn. Okay. We are right about time for a ad break. So I do want to take a look at the picture here. I don't think this has happened yet. I saw him pass something from the hollow of his hand. This is the black spot, the blind man. So from this book, the blind man putting the black spot into uh, the captain's hand. I never can tell where they're going to put those pictures, honestly. Swing down here. The sea chest. There's just like this version that the Gutenberg library has. It's just gorgeous. Here's a picture open. Here we go. This is him and his mother counting out the guineas where they can find them into the bag. All the trinkets, the muskets, the everything else that was in the sea chest. Down in the bottom. And she began to count the captain's score from the sailor's bag. So his tricorder hat up top. All of his goods and things. His fancy clothes. I guess he would be buried in those, I suppose. Okay. Well, we are between chapters. I'm going to go ahead and run that batch of ads, go use the restroom. And then when I come back, we can do another couple of chapters. Be right back. What did I touch? I pushed a button. All right, let's start again. Thank you. So, The Last of the Blind Man. This is the image here of the beginning of this chapter from the Gutenberg edition of The Treasure Island. Okay. Chapter 5, The Last of the Blind Man. My curiosity, in a sense, was stronger than my fear, for I could not remain where I was, but crept back to the bank again, whence, sheltering my head behind a bush of broom, I might command the road before our door. I was scarcely in position ere my enemies began to arrive, 7 or 8 of them running hard, their feet beating out of time along the road. And the man with the lantern some paces in front. 3 men ran together, hand in hand, and I made out, even through the mist, that the middle man of this trio was the blind beggar. The next moment his voice showed me that I was right. So the man in front with the lantern and the 3 gaily running together, holding hands, the blind beggar and 2 compatriots there. "Down with the door!" he cried. "Aye, aye, sir!" answered 2 or 3, and a rush was made upon the Admiral Benbow, the lantern-bearer following, and then I could see them pause and hear speeches passed in a lower key, as if they were surprised to find the door open. But the pause was brief, for the blind man again issued his commands, his voice sounding louder and higher as if he were afire with eagerness and rage. "In, in, in!" he shouted, and cursed them for their delay. 4 or 5 of them obeyed at once, 2 remaining on the row with the formidable beggar. There was a pause, then a cry of surprise, and then a voice shouting from the house, "Bill's dead!" But the blind man swore at them again for their delay. "Search him, some of you shirking lubbers, and the rest of you aloft, and get the chest!" he cried. I could hear their feet rattling up our old stairs, so that the house must have shook with it. Promptly afterward, fresh sounds of astonishment arose. The window of the captain's room was thrown open with a slam and a jingle of broken glass, and a man leaned out into the moonlight, head and shoulders, and addressed the blind beggar on the road below him. "Pew!" he cried. "They've been before us. Someone's turned the chest out alow and aloft." "Is it there?" roared Pew. "The money's there." The blind man cursed the money. "Flint's fist, I mean," he cried. "We don't see it here nohow," returned the man. "Here, you below there, is it on Bill?" cried the blind man again. At that another fellow, probably him who had remained below to search the captain's body, came to the door of the inn. "Bill's been overhauled already." "Bill's been overhauled already," said he. "Nothing's left." "It's these people of the inn. It's that boy. I wish I had put his eyes out," cried the blind man, Pew. They were here no time ago. They had the door bolted when I tried it. Scatter, lads, and find 'em." Sure enough, they've left their glim here," said the fellow from the window. "Scatter and find 'em." "Rout the house out," reiterated Pew, striking with his stick upon the road. Then there followed a great to-do through all our old inn. Heavy feet pounding to and fro, furniture thrown over, doors kicked in, until the very rocks re-echoed, and the men came out again, one after another, on the road, and declared that we were nowhere to be found. And just then, the same whistle that had alarmed my mother and myself over the dead captain's money was once more clearly audible through the night, but this time twice repeated. I had thought it to be the blind man's trumpet, so to speak, summoning his crew to the assault, but I now found that it was a signal from the hillside toward the hamlet, and, from its effect upon the buccaneers, a signal to warn them of approaching danger. "There's Dirk again," said one. "Twice! We'll have a budge, mates." "Budge, you skulk," cried Pew. "Dirk was a fool and a coward from the first. You wouldn't mind him. They must be close by. They can't be far. You have your hands on a scatter and look for 'em, dogs. Oh, shiver my soul," he cried, "if I had my eyes." This appeal seemed to produce some effect, for two of the fellows began to look here and there among the lumber, but half-heartedly. I thought, with half an eye to their own danger all the time, while the rest stood irresolute on the road. "You have your hands on thousands, you fools, and you hang a leg. You'll be as rich as kings if you could find it, and you know it's here. You stand there malingering. There wasn't one of you dared face Bill, and I did it, the blind man, and I'm to lose my chance for you? I'm to be a poor crawling beggar sponging for rum when I might be rolling in a coach. If you had the pluck of a weevil in a biscuit, you would catch them still." "Hang it, Pew, we've got the doubloons," grumbled one. "They might have hid the blessed thing," said another. "Take the George's, Pew, and don't stand here squalling." Squalling was the word for it. Pew's anger rose so high at these objections, till at last, his passion completely taking the upper hand, he struck at them right and left in his blindness. "Have it ye! Smack, smack!" And his stick sounded heavily on more than one. These in their turn cursed back at the blind miscreant, threatened him in horrid terms, and tried in vain to catch the stick and wrest it from his grasp. Can you imagine? He's just swailing around, blindly smacking anything he can, get within range of his walking stick. These in their turn cursed back at blah, 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 wrested from his grasp. There we go. This quarrel was the saving of us, for while it was still raging, another sound came from the top of the hill on the side of the hamlet, the tramp of horses galloping. Almost at the same time, a pistol shot flash and report came from the hedge side, and that was plainly the last signal of danger. Here we go. For the buccaneers turned at once and ran, separating in every direction. One seaward along the cove, one slant across the hill, and so on, so that in half a minute not a sign of them remained but Pew. Is there an ad? Is Twitch being weird? No, it's just whatever is going on with the okay, the browser's weird. I'll just refresh it. It's having a stroke. There we go.
Water.
Drink
Become
water. Become moist. Yeah, you got it. Me. We haven't had any further issues since the that initial hiccup when it, kicked me. Let's see, where was I? For the buccaneers turned at once and ran, separating in every direction, one seaward along the cove, one slant across the hill, and so on, so that in half a minute not a sign of them remained but Pew. Him they had deserted. Whether in sheer panic or out of revenge for his ill words and blows, I know not. But there he remained behind, tapping up and down the road in a frenzy, and groping and calling for his comrades. Finally, he took the wrong turn and ran a few steps past me toward the hamlets, crying, "Johnny, Black Dog, Dirk," and other names. "You won't leave old Pew, mates, not old Pew." But then the noise of horses topped the rise, and 4 or 5 riders came in sight in the moonlight, swept at a full gallop down the slope. At this Pew saw his error, turned with a scream, and ran straight for the ditch, into which he rolled, but he was on his feet again in a second, and made another dash, now utterly bewildered, right under the nearest of the coming horses. The rider tried to save him, but in vain. Down went Pew with a cry that rang high into the night, and the 4 hooves trampled and spurned him and passed by. He fell on his side, then gently collapsed upon his face and moved no more. I leaped to my feet and hailed the riders. They were pulling up, at any rate, horrified at the accident, and I soon saw what they were. One, tailing out behind the rest, was a lad that had gone from the hamlet to Dr. Livesey's. The rest were revenue officers whom he had met by the way, and with whom and with whom he had the intelligence to return at once. Some news of the lugger in Kit's Hole had found its way to Supervisor Dance, and set him forth that night in our direction, and to that circumstance my mother and I owed our preservation from death. Pew was dead, stone dead. As for my mother, when we had carried her up to the hamlet, a little cold water and salts, and that soon brought her back again, and she was none the worse for her terror, though she still continued to deplore the balance of the money. In the meantime the supervisor rode on as fast as he could to Kit's Hole, but his men had to dismount and grope down the dingle leading. Grope down the dingle? What does that even mean? But his men had to dismount and grope down the dingle, leading and sometimes supporting their horses, and in continual fear of ambushes. So it was no great matter for surprise that when they got down to the hole, the lugger was already under way. Down the way, where was I in the book? Okay. When they got down to the hole, the lugger was already under way. Though still close in, he hailed her. A voice replied, telling him to keep out of the moonlight or he would get some lead in him, and at the same time a bullet whistled close by his arm. Soon after, the lugger doubled the point and disappeared. Mr. Dance stood there, as he said, like a fish out of water, and all he could do was to dispatch a man to B to warn the cutter, and that, he is just about as good as nothing. They've got off clean, and there's an end. Only, he added, I'm glad I trod on Master Pew's corns, for by this time he had heard my story. I went back with him to the Admiral Benbow. Hang a second. And you cannot imagine a house in such a state of smash. The very clock had been thrown down by these fellows in their furious hunt after my mother and myself, and though nothing had actually been taken away except the captain's money bag and a little silver from the till, I could see at once that we were ruined. Mr. Dance could make nothing of the scene. They got the money, you say? Well then, Hawkins, what in fortune were they after? More money, I suppose? No, sir, not money, I think, replied I. In fact, sir, I believe I have the thing in my breast pocket, and to tell you the truth, I should like to get it put in safety. To be sure, boy, quite right, said he. I'll take it if you like. I thought perhaps Dr. Livesey, I began. Perfectly right, he interrupted very cheerily. Perfectly right, a gentleman and a magistrate, and now I come to think of it, I might as well ride round there myself, and report to him or squire. Master Pew's dead, when all's done. Not that I regret it, but he's dead, you see, and people will make it out against an officer of His Majesty's revenue if make it out they can. Now, I'll tell you, Hawkins, if you like, I'll take you along. I thanked him heartily for the offer, and we walked back to the hamlet where the horses were. By the time I had told my mother of my purpose, they were all in the saddle. Dogger, said Mr. Dance, you have a good horse. Take up this lad behind you. As soon as I was mounted, holding on to Dogger's belt, the supervisor gave the word, and the party struck out at a bouncing trot on the road to Dr. Livesey's house. Okay, we are between chapters. So give me a second.
Snack time!
You're not wrong. I'm getting quite snackish. Okay. Okay. We are between chapters. Chapter 6, The Captain's Papers. I believe that puts us. This is him swinging around with his mallet, banging on those sea dogs, those seafaring men. Poor old Pew, blind as a bat, smacking at everything that's not nailed down. So our next chapter will be The Captain's Paper. Let me finish hydrating here. And this will be our final chapter this evening. The Captain's Papers. Chapter 6. The Captain's Papers. We rode hard all the way till we drew up before Dr. Livesey's door. The house was all dark to the front. Mr. Dance told me to jump down and knock, and Dogger gave me a stirrup to descend by. The door was opened almost at once by the maid. "Is Dr. Livesey in?" I asked. "No," she said. He had come home in the afternoon, but had gone up to the hill to dine and pass the evening with the squires. "So there we go, boys," said Mr. Dance. This time, as the distance was short, I did not mount, but ran with Dogger's stirrup leather to the lodge gates and up the long, leafless, moonlit avenue to where the white line of the hall building looked on either hand. Sorry. Arranging family stuff, man. 'Tis the season. Da 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 da. Okay, here we go. To the lodge gates and up the long, leafless, moonlit avenue to where the white line of the hall buildings looked on either hand on great old gardens. Here Mr. Dance dismounted, and taking me along with him, was admitted to at a word into the house. The servant led us down a matted passage, and showed us at the end into a great library, all lined with bookcases and busts upon the top of them, where the squire and Dr. Livesey sat, pipe in hand, on either side of a bright fire. I had never seen the squire so near at hand. He was a tall man, over 6 feet high, and broad in proportion, and he had a bluff, rough and ready face, all roughened and reddened and lined in his long travels. His eyebrows were very black and moved readily, and this gave him a look of some temper, not bad, you would say, but quick and high. "Come in, Mr. Dance," says he, very stately and condescending. "Good evening, Dance," says the doctor with a nod, "and good evening to you, friend Jim. What good wind brings you here?" The supervisor stood up straight and stiff and told the story like a lesson, and you should have seen how the two gentlemen leaned forward and looked at each other and forgot to smoke in their surprise and interest. When they heard how my mother went back to the inn, Dr. Livesey fairly slapped his thigh, and the squire cried, "Bravo!" and broke his long pipe against the grate. Long before it was done, Mr. Trelawney, that you will remember was the squire's name, had got up from his seat and was striding about the room, and the doctor, as if to hear the better, had taken off his powdered wig and sat there looking very strange indeed with his own close-cropped black poll. At last Mr. Dance finished the story. "Mr. Dance," said the squire, you are a very noble fellow, and as for riding down that black atrocious miscreant, I regard it as an act of virtue, sir, like stamping on a cockroach. This lad Hawkins is a trump, I perceive. Hawkins, will you ring that bell? Mr. Dance must have some ale." "And so, Jim," said the doctor, "you have the thing that they were after, have you?" "Here it is, sir," said I, and gave him the oilskin packet. The doctor looked at it all over, as if his fingers were itching to open it, but instead of doing that, he put it quietly in the pocket of his coat. "Squire," said he, When Dance has had his ale, he must, of course, be off on his Majesty's service, but I mean to keep Jim Hawkins here to sleep at my house. And with your permission, I propose we have up the cold pie and let him sup. As you will, Livesey, said the squire. Hawkins has earned better than cold pie. So a big pigeon pie was brought in and put on a side table, and I made a hearty supper, for I was hungry as a hawk, while Mr. Dance was further complimented and at last dismissed. And now, squire, said the doctor. And now, Livesey, said the squire in the same breath. One at a time, laughed Dr. Livesey. You have heard of this Flint, I suppose. Heard of him, cried the squire. Heard of him, you say? He was the bloodthirstiest buccaneer that sailed. Blackbeard was a child to Flint. The Spaniards were so prodigiously afraid of him that I tell you, sir, I was sometimes proud he was an Englishman. I've seen his topsails with these eyes off Trinidad, and the cowardly son of a rum puncheon that I sailed with put back, sir, into port of Spain. Well, I've heard of him myself in England, said the doctor, but the point is, had he money? Money, cried the squire. Have you heard the story? What were these villains after but money? What do they care for but money? For what would they risk their rascal carcasses but money? That we shall soon know, replied the doctor, but you are so confoundedly hot-headed and exclamatory that I cannot get a word in. What I want to know is this. Supposing that I have here in my pocket some clue. What a weird way to spell clue. Weird. Supposing that I have here in my pocket some clue to where Flint buried his treasure, will that treasure amount to much? Amount, sir, cried the squire. It will amount to this. If we have the clue you talk about, I fit out in a ship in Bristol dock, and have you and Hawkins here along, and I'll have that treasure if I search a year. Very well, said the doctor. Now then, if Jim is agreeable, we'll open the packet. And he laid it before him on the table. The bundle was sewn together, and the doctor had to get out his instrument case and cut the stitches with his medical scissors. It contained two things, a book and a sealed paper. First of all, we'll try the book, observed the doctor. The squire and I were both peering over his shoulder as he opened it, for Dr. Livesey had kindly motioned me to come round him from the side table, where I had been eating, to enjoy the sport of the search. On the first page there was only some scraps of writing, such as a man with a pen in his hand might make for idleness of practice. One was the same as the tattoo mark Billy Bones his fancy. Then there was Mr. W. Bones, mate. No more rum. Off Palm Key, he got it. And some other snatches, mostly single words and unintelligible. I could not help wondering who it was that had got it, and what it was that he got. A knife in his back as not. A knife in his back as like as not. The very ticking of the clock filled us with alarms. Interesting. Not much instruction there, said Dr. Livesey, as he passed on. The next 10 or 12 pages were filled with a curious series of entries. There was a date at one end of the line, and at the other end a sum of money, as in common account books, but instead of explanatory writing, only a varying number of crosses between the two. On the 12th of June, 1745, for instance, a sum of £70 had plainly become due to someone, and there was nothing but 6 crosses to explain the cause. In a few cases, to be sure, the name of a place would be added as off Caracas, or a mere entry of latitude and longitude as 62 degrees 1720 by 19 degrees 2 and 40. The record lasted over nearly 20 years, the amount of the separate entries growing larger as time went on, and at the end a grand total had been made out after 5 or 6 wrong additions, and these words appended, Bones his pile. I can't make head or tail of this, said Dr. Livesey. This thing is clear as noonday, cried the squire. This is the black-hearted hound's account book. These crosses stand for the names of ships or towns that they sank or plundered. The sums are the scoundrel's share, and where he feared an ambiguity, you see, he added something clearer. Off at Caracas now, you see. Here was some unhappy vessel boarded off that coast. God help the poor souls that manned her quarrel long ago. Let's open that and we can go back to it here in a little bit. Right, said the doctor. See what it is to be a traveler? Right, and the amounts increase, you see, as he rose in rank. There was little else in the volume but a few bearings of places noted in the blank leaves toward the end, and a table for reducing French, English, and Spanish moneys to a common value. Thrifty man, cried the doctor. He wasn't the one to be cheated. And now, said the squire, for the other. The paper had been sealed in several places with a thimble by way of seal, the very thimble, perhaps, that I had found in the captain's pocket. The doctor opened the seals with great care, and there fell out the map of an island, with latitude and longitude soundings, names of hills and bays and inlets, and every particular that would be needed to bring a ship to safe anchorage upon its shores. It was about 9 miles long and 5 across, shaped, you might say, like a fat dragon standing up, and had 2 fine landlocked harbors, and a hill to be in the center marked the Spyglass. There were several editions of a later date, but above all, 3 crosses of red ink, 2 on the north part of the island, 1 in the southwest, and besides this last, in the same red ink and in a small, neat hand, very different from the captain's tottery characters, these words: "Bulk of treasure here." Over on the back, the same hand had written this further information: "Tall tree, spyglass shoulder, bearing a point to the north of north by northeast. Skeleton Island east, southeast, and by east, 10 feet. The bar silver is in the north cache. You can find it by the trend of the east hummock, 10 fathoms south of the black crag with a face on it. The arms are easy found, and the sandhill north point of North Inland Cape, bearing east and a quarter north, JF. That must be Flint. That was all. But brief as it was, and to me incomprehensible, it filled the squire and Dr. Livesey with delight. Livesey, said the squire, you will give up this wretched practice at once. Tomorrow I start for Bristol. In 3 weeks' time, 3 weeks, 2 weeks, 10 days. We'll have the best ship, sir, and the choicest crew in England. Hawkins shall come as cabin boy. You'll make a famous cabin boy, Hawkins. You, Livesey, are ship's doctor, and I am admiral. We'll take Redruth, Joyce, and Hunter. We'll have favorable winds, a quick passage, and not the least difficulty in finding the spot, and money to eat, to roll in, to play duck and drake with ever after. Trelawney, said the doctor, I'll go with you, and I'll go bail for it. So will Jim, and be a credit to the undertaking. There's only one man I'm afraid of. And who's that? Cried the squire. Name the dog, sir. You, replied the doctor, for you cannot hold your tongue. We are not the only men who know of this paper. These fellows who attacked the inn tonight, bold, desperate blades. And the rest who stayed aboard the lugger and more, I dare say, not far off, are one and all through thick and thin bound that they'll get that money. We must none of us go alone till we get to sea. Jim and I shall stick together in the meanwhile. You'll take Joyce and Hunter when you ride to Bristol, and from first to last not one of us must breathe a word of what we've found. Livesey, replied the squire, you are always in the right of it. I'll be as silent as the grave. And with that, we are ending the first part of the book. So that is 6 chapters in, 50 pages, give or take. This is a rousing tale. It's exciting, it's interesting, it's fun, whimsical. I can see why this became a book that roused the imagination of every boy in Scotland, England, Ireland, and so on. Why it was like translated into so many languages full of like mystery and whimsy and I'm gonna go fight pirates, just excitement. I can see why so many people enjoy this book. It's very exciting and I really like it. Um, Thus far, 6 chapters in, spot on. Stevenson, mwah, mwah, c'est magnifique. You're onto something here, bud. I really like your work. Which tells me I have a feeling that the Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, the strange tale, will be quite good. Well, you could, there's nothing stopping you except for the fact it's like probably 4 in the morning for you, Valen. So you're up a little bit late. Now it is about 10 p.m. EST. It is 6 o'clock for me over here in Alaska. I have some obligations tomorrow with family, and some of those include making a quick run over to the shop and getting some eggs and some other goodies. I am going to be baking up a storm this evening. I am going to make some oat fudge bars, which I will post a picture of on Twitter. I don't know, be kind of exciting. I haven't taken many photos of food and put them up there. But yee, as Curious says, I'm going to make up some oat fudge bars and I have to make deviled eggs because I make them the best in the family and friends' family, and they always ask me to bring them for every occasion. Mostly the secret is you just make them a little bit dry and then have a bar of toppings that people can just pick and choose what they want. So a little bit of mustard, little bit of mayo, mostly the inner part of the eggs. The key is not to overcook those yolks because then they get a little sulfury. No good. So just slightly undercook the yolks, a little bit of mayo, a little bit of mustard, a little bit of seasoning. By that I usually use like a little bit of some black pepper, maybe a little salt. And then toppings bar. Do you like little pickles? Awesome. Do you like little bits of bacon? Awesome. Do you want cayenne pepper? Do you want, paprika? Whatever it is that you want. You just pick what you choose. And then everybody's excited and everybody's happy. Very hard to disappoint them when, when they get to choose their own. So I will bend. I will say good night and have a fair good evening. And for those of you that are going to sleep, I hoped these tales and these chapters warmed your brain enough to have amazing dreams. Hopefully not of a scary blind man swinging around a stick, but you do you. So for those of you that are celebrating American Thanksgiving tomorrow, or in my case, like family and Friendsgiving, I hope you all have a wonderful holiday. And for those of you poor folk that have to work tomorrow, I hope you have a wonderful day, and I will see you on Friday.